Okay, so yeah, welcome everyone to the energy and infrastructure track here. We'll start here with the first presentation. Yeah, we will have like a timer here just for thing. We have a 45-minute session, so we are keeping it to 35 minutes. Allow for some questions after that, and then some changeover. So we'll set the timer for 35 minutes. So at the end of 30 minutes, we'll see the color change, and then at the, to yellow, and then at 35 we'll change it to red, and we can hopefully stick to the time here. Just in terms of other logistics, yeah, there's a restrooms right outside here in the back. So we'll get started here. Thank you all for attending. Yeah, we'll start with Ram here with the introductions. Thank you.
So, Namaste and Vanakkam, that is our national language and my mother tongue. This basically means welcome. So, my job here, my name is Ram. My job here is basically to introduce Vail, who is going to be here with his colleague, Tej, and they're going to give the presentation. So, I just found out about this yesterday, and I said, can you give me some material about Vail? And they gave me this little folder here, and I thought this was a bio, but frankly, this looks like an autobiography. So I distilled a little bit from here. Vail is a civil engineer. He's got his bachelor's degree from India in Tamil Nadu. He has a master's in environmental engineering from the South Dakota School of Mines. He is also a licensed engineer, a PE, which basically means in the state of Michigan and other states, which basically means that the state feels comfortable that he can design solutions to problems and implement them. He is a principal of GHD, which is a very large multi-billion, multinational firm. They have over 12,000 employees, and he does a whole host of things. Look at this, and there's too many things that he does. I don't know how he has time for that. What is very interesting about him is that he is actually an entrepreneur. He has built companies, multiple companies in different fields. IT, environmental engineering, civil engineering, and then basically he has sold them. But in addition to building companies, one very interesting tidbit about him is he is a master builder. He also built his own home. He can do it all. The electrical, the mechanical, the flooring, and the plumbing, I guess. He serves on the ASEI National Board. He's also an advisor to the Michigan Board. But one thing I'd like to end, because, no matter what we get on the bio, what is most interesting is what is not on the bio. So I'd like to say this. Vail is actually an excellent player of the sport, which is India's national sport. And by the way, that is not cricket, it is hockey. So he's actually a very good hockey player, which I know of. He's also a movie buff. He watches all kinds of movies. He's very knowledgeable about that. And in addition to building his company, in addition to building as an entrepreneur, a master builder, what Vail I appreciate and admire about him most is that he builds relationships, he builds trust. And therefore, with that, I hand it over to you, Vail. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you for those kind words. And I know Ram for 30 years, and so there's so much to say, and he left out a lot of other details. So today we are going to talk about energy transition, and so I'm going to prime this, set the stage for Tej to give you guys wonderful information about the energy transition. And as we all know, the global energy market is under stress, right? Yeah. And energy is critical for any country. And we are looking at multiple renewables. We saw in the keynote that everybody talked about renewables, right? What is happening in the industry, how we are managing it, what kind of decarbonization effort is going on in the industry, right? And this is complicated process. This is not one shoe fits all. It is not tomorrow, let's take all the solar panels, put it in there, and we are making it go away. This is a combination. It has got a geopolitical implication. A war in Russia, a war in Ukraine is impacting Europe's energy market. And so geopolitics plays a major role in this energy, and that's what makes it interesting. And we are in this transition stage at this time. I'm sure there is a. So when we look at the energy context, it's all about global warming, right? We are in this stage where we are seeing the climate change, and there's a long-term weather impact. We are feeling it, we are observing it, and rise to sea level. And as a company, we are working on this thing on a daily basis. We are seeing the impact of it. We are not only seeing it in the United States, we are seeing it in the Middle East, and every one of these aspects requires every one of us to limit the global warming to under 1.5 degrees C, and decarbonization. We are working not only talk about decarbonization, we need to work on it as corporates, and it is a ethical, moral responsibility for every one of us. And when you're looking at some of the renewables, we are talking about hydrogen, which Tej is going to talk about, and carbon capture and utilization, which is CCUS, renewable natural gas, electric vehicles, oil, gas, solar, wind, all type of energy has to come in when we are going to be discussing this process here. And this I stole it from Tej's, one of his presentation. Global energy order is changing, and future energy is leading this energy transition. And when we talk about energy, we talk about oil and gas companies. I work closely with many of them. Many of my colleagues here are working on with the oil and gas companies, and they are leading the charge, believe it or not. Okay, it's not about them leaving them out. They are working on providing every consumer. They are striving to provide a differentiated natural gas, where methane concentration and methane emissions are under 1%. Previously, we used to have 6% of the gas that is produced in the United States. We used to let it out as fugitive. Now we are reducing it under 1%. Every effort is being taken. Process reengineering is occurring. So decarbonization becomes a key aspect, not only for renewables, it is also for the old oil. Crude oil production, pipeline companies are striving to reduce their number of incidents of releases. Crude oil companies are trying to reduce it. And the landfill gas to energy that Tej is going to talk about is going to also set the stage for future. And I have the honor and privilege of introducing my best friend and colleague, Tej Gida. Tej is a global future energy leader. He's an environmental engineer, also an adjunct professor at the University of Waterloo. And one of the great things about Tej is he's an amazing motivator. Our company is about 15,000 people. Everybody is motivated by what Tej brings in. He has his Tej talk. He talks about energy, motivates us, where we are going to find projects and we are going to implement them to make the world a better place. And he lives in Waterloo, Canada, and he came here today just to speak to you guys and speak to all of us. And he has 4 beautiful children, and lives with his wife and 4 beautiful children in Waterloo. If anybody hasn't visited Waterloo, you should. It's an amazing place. And with that, I'll turn it over to my friend, Tej.
Thank you, Sue. I do like to try to be aspirational when I speak, but part of that is because I work with aspirational people. That man is a hero of mine. That man is a hero. I'm going to say that. So, yeah, I was thinking about how to present today, and I did decide to do something a little bit different in terms of how I wanted to do this and set the stage for the rest of the presentation. So I think we'll just launch right into it. Oops. Okay. So I'm going to ask some questions of all of you. You don't have to be right unless you're a GHD employee. Then you better get it right. And what I want you to do is all stand up for a second. Stand up. Stand up. Okay. So I have a question. The United Kingdom has more offshore wind turbines producing renewable electricity than North America. That's a true or false question. If it's true, if you believe it's true, walk over there. If it's false, walk over there. If you're not sure, stay in the middle. True, false. All right. So more true than false. So United Kingdom is small. I'm from the United Kingdom, actually. I was born there. So it's a small country. Look at North America. Look at our coastline, how big our coastline is. So the stats are, there are 2,500 offshore wind turbines around the UK right now, spread amongst 44 wind farms, and they are producing 12.7 gigawatts of electricity right now. The parallel for North America, and this is getting to the heart of what do we need to do for infrastructure? What do we need to build? We have 15 megawatts of offshore wind energy here. So that's 300 times less than the UK. So think about one of the infrastructure challenges we have with all this abundant wind energy in the oceans and even our lakes that we have not done anything with yet. By the way, if you look at those numbers, 2,500 turbines, 12.7 gigawatts, that's about 5 megawatts per turbine. The newest turbines that are coming out are up to 15 megawatts, and they're taller, each one, than the Eiffel Tower. That's what we're talking about in terms of innovation in this field. So we need to build a lot of these. And the engineers thinking about it. I'm going to do this to you 7 full times, okay? I'm just going to keep doing this. I have 7 questions, and they're all carefully selected, I promise. Okay, the most abundant element on the planet is hydrogen. And actually, this time we'll line up by where the check mark and the cross is. So if you believe that's true, go towards that side of the room because that's where the check mark is. If you don't believe that's true, just go on over there. Nothing bad will happen to you unless you're a GHD employee. There are a few here. So this is true. The most abundant element on the planet is hydrogen. Does anyone know where that hydrogen is in its largest quantity? Where is it? Water. It's in water. So if you have water, you have hydrogen. If you have hydrogen, you have energy. And that's going to play into the rest of this discussion. We didn't hear a lot about hydrogen this morning on the panel. We heard about electrification and charging, and that's great. We need EVs. But there is a step beyond EVs that we've got to explore, and that's the hydrogen economy, especially in the mobility market for vehicles. Maybe not passenger vehicles, maybe one day, but for heavy-duty vehicles, buses, transit vehicles, mining vehicles, large fleets, hydrogen is coming. The question will be, how are we going to make the hydrogen? Well, we can split a water molecule. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Well, yeah, you say it's expensive, but it's not as expensive as you think. And like everything, I just put solar panels on my house. 20 years ago, I would never put solar panels on my house. It's too expensive. Take a look at the cost curve for solar electricity and how far it's come down. And now think about a parallel curve for hydrogen. It's on the same trajectory. It's a matter of time. I can't tell you when that time will be. No one can, but it will happen. All right. Renewables make up 27% of energy generation in the United States as of 2022. 27% of all our energy. True over there, false over there. We have a lot of people who think it's false. It is false. It is false. Renewables make up 12% of energy generation in the United States. Just 12. Now that by itself, when we're talking about infrastructure, that's not much. So just think about all the work we need to do between now and let's call it 2050 to put more renewables on the grid here, but not just the electrical grid, but the natural gas grid as well. We're going to talk about that too. So just the rest of it, 36% of energy in the U.S. comes from petroleum. It shouldn't be probably a big surprise, right? We all drive a lot of cars. Well, we'll get there. Don't get ahead of me. Stealing my thunder. 11% from coal. We have 11% of our energy from coal here. 32% from natural gas. It's a big chunk. The third is natural gas here. 12% from renewables. That leaves us with 91%. So the other 9% comes from nuclear. Comes from nuclear. So we're going to talk about nuclear a little bit later as well and how that factors into this infrastructure equation. All right. Hydro counts as renewable. Hydroelectric power counts as renewable by almost any standard. So it depends on where you are. Obviously, some places have hydroelectric, some don't. Of the 12% renewables, about 4% of that is hydroelectric power. So it's an important piece. It's not a dominant piece. 1/3 of the renewables is hydroelectric. Yeah, and it's actually cheap renewables as well. From a cents per kilowatt hour basis, it's one of the cheapest ways to make renewable electricity. But you need that elevation difference, and you need water in order to do it. And we don't have that everywhere. All right, you're all playing so well. And so I wasn't sure you would actually do this, but I'm thankful that you are. So, okay, the United States has shut down 40% of its coal power capacity since 2010. True over there, false over here. I'm curious as to why you all think that's false, but it's okay. There's no right answers or wrong answers here, except for that one. It is true. Since 2010, 229 coal plants have been shut down in the United States. About 1/3 of all coal-fired electricity in the United States has been shut down in the last 13 years. So the question is very simple. You're going to take all that down. You're going to shut that all down. What are you going to replace it with? That's the question, right? So that's where we come in, all of us, with answers. So one caveat to all this, you can say, let's put in wind farms. Let's put in utility scale solar. DTE was here today. I believe they have utility scale solar, which is just very big solar. That's great. And we all know the renewables are intermittent. They're intermittent sources of generation. The wind blows when it blows. The sun shines during the day, not at night. That source is very variable in terms of how it gets onto the grid. So one of the big infrastructure challenges we have right now is energy storage. Okay. If you saw our GHD video, there was a line about battery storage in Australia. We built a 100 megawatt battery using Tesla batteries at the bottom of the wind farm, specifically to buffer the grid against the variability of the wind energy. So battery storage is one. I challenge us all to think about where we're going to get all the lithium to build all these batteries, because there's not enough. Lithium may also end up being a EPA designated substance of interest around groundwater. So where are we going to get the rest of this energy storage? Can we use water to store it? You know, what other forms can we use to store energy? It's going to be a significant quantity of this discussion. Okay, next up. Yes. Here is your prize. I brought this specifically. All the way from Waterloo, Ontario, I brought an apple. So I like apples. My 4 kids love apples. Organic waste. So if I choose to eat this, and I will, and there'll be an apple core, and I'm going to dispose of it somewhere, that's organic waste. Organic waste produced by each person in the U.S. can produce twice the natural gas currently consumed. 88 billion cubic feet of natural gas is used in the United States every year. And I'm saying this can produce twice that volume in a given year. True is over there, false is over here. It is absolutely a trick question. I mean, it's wonderful if it were true, right? And it is sort of true. It's actually 5 times more. If I converted every bit of the organic waste we produce in the US tomorrow to natural gas, and you can do that, I'm going to show you a project where that happens, I'd make 5 times our natural gas consumption. Now, do we actually do that? Not even close. Where does most of our organic waste go? Anyone know? It goes into a landfill, right? Which is a bit of a shame. But how do we build the infrastructure to change that? That's the question. Sorry?
How much what percentage are we?
What percent? Okay, well, let's put it this way. So that we, in the U.S., there's about 280 million tons per year of garbage that is disposed of or created. About 40% of that is organic. So pick a number, let's call it 150 million tons. Of that, that's being used for beneficial reuse and energy production, probably 5% at most. 100%. Absolutely. And that's a day-to-day decision. I walked in here today. The first thing I do when I go to a conference, it's a really silly thing to do. I do a lot of silly things. Well, no, I went for coffee because I'm addicted to caffeine. And the first thing I noticed is disposable cups, not mugs, right? Water, not glasses, plastic, right? These are the decisions. And all the food waste we're about to generate, where's it going to go? Probably the garbage. There's no separate bin to collect organics here. Where I live in Ontario, and definitely if you go to Europe, there's like a really, really aggressive programs to take your food waste and put it in a separate bin so it can actually go. I'm going to show you a City of Toronto project later. They ask all their residents, here's the bin, put your organic waste in there, and they convert it all to energy now. Right? So these things can be done. Who's going to build the infrastructure? This one's got to be easy. I really hope this one's easy, but we'll see. The United States is trying to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. True over there, false over here. Absolutely true. That is the US's goal. That's the goal for many countries around the world, and that's fantastic. Now, to do that, we are going to engage in the biggest infrastructure spend in a generation. Because, as we said before, most of our energy still comes from fossil fuels. How are we going to change that? This is a once-in-a-generation change. The Inflation Reduction Act that was passed here is a land-shaking piece of funding that the entire rest of the world is paying attention to. One of my observations, we work globally, is that we have project developers developing renewables projects in Australia who, as soon as they saw the Inflation Reduction Act, said, nope, we're not going to invest our money there. We're coming to the US because the funding is here. The incentives are here. If I want a production tax credit to make hydrogen, I'm coming to the US. I'm not going to go to the UK. I'm not going to Europe. I'm not going to Asia. I'm not going to Australia. Once in a generation funding lift that is profoundly changing the game. It's beyond anything anyone else has done in the world. That's a good news story, I think. And that's going to help. I would estimate it's $400 billion for clean energy. That's what the IRA says. There's provisions that uplift that, so they will likely get to about $1 trillion. There's $1 trillion spend about to happen in changing everything that we need changed. All right. I think this is the last one. This is the last one. I promise. All right. I just said net zero 2050. That's what the U.S. is all about. So fossil fuels will no longer be utilized by 2050. True over there? False over here. People are all very cynical. It is false. It is false because of what net zero is. And net zero doesn't mean we're going to end fossil fuels. Net zero means we're going to balance emissions with reductions to the point of zero. So by 2050, we'll still have fossil fuels. I would suspect by 2100, and we're turning our heads to 2100, we'll still have fossil fuels as well. This is about energy transition. not about stepping off a cliff and saying, we are going to stop all fossil fuel usage right now. We can't do that. And there's many reasons for why we can't do that. So now on that point, and you can all sit down now, I have no more questions for you. Thank you for playing along. I know. That's usually a good time to get up and move around, isn't it? So when you hear net zero, I wonder if there's a laser pointer on this thing. Yeah, there we go. Okay, challenge the narrative of net zero. When you hear that terminology, challenge that narrative. And the reason I encourage you to challenge that narrative is this is our past. We created a lot of emissions. You can see the emissions, and yeah, there's a little bit of reductions and sequestration. That's the past. That's the industrial revolution era. That's the era in which we live. Most of civilization has been fueled by our use of fossil fuels. That's why we're able to do all these things. So this is the past. This is net zero, where all the stuff we're putting up is balanced by the stuff that's coming down. It's kind of equal bars. That's where we want to get. Now think about what that means from just an engineering standpoint. If there's 400 ppm of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we get to net zero, we're going to maintain 400 ppm of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's what net zero is. It's a little bit of a shell game, I think. The narrative I think we need, and the even bigger lift that goes beyond 2050, is net negative. And I love that term. I think we should use that term. What is net negative? How do we get reductions to be greater than the emissions so that we're actually removing CO2 from the atmosphere? That is the challenge of our generation. That is actually what this is about. So 2050 is just a stop on the energy transition pathway. It's not the end. We're going to be at this for the rest of the century. A little while ago, and you saw the opening slide, I had something called shocked. So we are really concerned about this, and we wanted to know from energy leaders what they're thinking. What are the oil and gas companies thinking? Soup said it directly right. If we're going to make a change here, we've got to work with the oil and gas companies. They're the biggest emitters. 75% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the world come from the energy sector. So they're the biggest emitter that there is. And we're going to have to work with them to change what they're doing. We wanted to understand how they were really feeling about this. So we went out to about 400 of them globally, did a huge piece of research. It was very expensive for us to do this, but well worth it because we learned a lot. So 94% say it's this energy crisis is the most severe their market has ever experienced. So forget the 1970s, forget anything since then. This is the big crunch for the energy sector. When we distilled down all the data we took, and we took tens of thousands of data points, we boiled it down to 3 major themes. It seemed to be that the data was landing in 3 themes. One was security, one society, one climate. So the thing that everyone's worried about is security of energy supply. How are we going to continuously, reliably supply energy to people when the cost of energy has gone through the roof and capacity is not where it needs to be, and we're telling energy companies, stop using fossil fuels, transition away from it. So they're worried about that because they don't understand how to transition. Soup said it nicely, but you're nice. You're a nice guy. So I'll say it less nicely. I don't think the oil and gas companies have any idea how to do this. It is an insurmountable challenge for them. We need a lot of innovation in this field to actually make this happen. They're willing, especially if they continue to make money. They need to do both. They're going to want to continue profits and do the transition at the same time. But it is a big challenge. You're completely redefining your company. BP has a net zero 2050 goal. BP is a big company. By 2050, if they're going to hit that, they're not predominantly moving fossil fuels anymore. They're doing something else. How do you change a company like that quickly? That's the challenge that they have. Society, this is a big one. 76% said the energy crisis is reducing the standard of living across the globe. Energy is, the energy crisis right now is responsible for about 75% of the inflation that we've seen over the last 2 years. And that is disproportionately affecting people who are the least able to afford it. And they're concerned about that, which they should be. And then climate, and I find this one fascinating. through the COVID period and after the COVID period, and hopefully we're over now, 42% of these leaders said, hey, we're going to accelerate their net zero plans. So instead of 2050, we're going to go to 2045. We're going to go quicker. They actually accelerated. And the other half slowed down. And that is a really interesting data point because this is a field in chaos right now. There's no simple answers here. So we've got people speeding up and slowing down at the same time. You probably wouldn't be surprised to know that a lot of people who are slowing down are in Europe. They're saying, okay, we can't do it as quickly as we thought because we have a big problem. And I want to get into a little bit of that problem. Who's this guy? Yeah, I was going to say it's not me. I've never looked like that. Rishi Sunak. So I was in London 2 weeks ago, or actually, no, sorry, last week, when he made a bunch of announcements. Does anyone know what the announcements are that he made? What was it?
It was about that we're going to be transition will happen slower or something to that effect.
That's right. Transition will happen slower. So Rishi Sunak has decided to take the UK, put up his arms and say, we're going to slow down our decarbonization efforts. One of the clearest ways to understand what he's done, one of the best examples, is the UK was meant to phase out internal combustion engine sales for vehicles by 2030. It's no longer 2030. It's now going to be 2035. So he's going to slow that down. There's other things he slowed down as well. But the lesson here is in energy transition, this is going to happen. Now, some people will take this as a data point and say, see, this is not doable, we can't do this, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, Germany, highly reliant on Russian natural gas and has been for many years, has dramatically increased the pace of their decarbonization because they have to. Because if they don't, they're going to be reliant on Russia for a very long time for their natural gas, and they can't have that. So the lesson for me on this is there's no stability in this area. This is not a stable market of energy transition. We're going to see forward and backward movement. We're going to see this as a spiky trend line. It is a trend line. It's always going in the right direction, but we're going to see noise on that trend line, and this is an element of noise. It's also highly politically driven, as you can imagine, and I imagine that this may change in the next couple of years as well. Well, yeah, you saw that right here. You saw that in the U.S., right? Like, yeah, a few years ago you were, not moving fast, and now you're moving faster than every country in the world. And you have another election coming. What's going to happen? I'm not an expert on your politics or legislation. Can someone repeal the Inflation Reduction Act or parts of it? I don't know. I suspect they would have a hard time doing it because a lot of people are already spending that money and are already doing the projects. So how are you going to stop all that economic activity? A couple more things. I mentioned a little bit of this. Geopolitical tensions. So what's really interesting about why inflation happened versus Russia-Ukraine, that created a huge geopolitical issue throughout the world. It rapidly destabilized energy pricing around the world. And by the way, inflation is not a U.S. thing. I monitor your politics a little bit and just listen to the news and all those types of things, and you all seem to think that your president is responsible for inflation and all these wonderful things. But our inflation is incredibly high in Canada as well, and it is everywhere else around the world. This is a global problem. This isn't due to any one country. This is due to energy being completely out of whack and destabilized. The other thing that's really interesting, part of the reason that prices went up, and these leaders told us, is not because of COVID, which is a factor, but because it came out of COVID. The problem with our energy system is it's not resilient. We turned it down during COVID. We didn't drive. We didn't fly. We didn't use as much energy. Energy just rapidly plummeted. Our usage plummeted. That wasn't hard to do. Turning it back on and turning it back up, that is extremely hard to do because our energy system is archaic. It's not resilient. It doesn't have redundancy. And that was part of the reason for this increased inflation. So how do you build a resilient energy supply system in the future? That has to be part of the thinking here. Yeah, 3/4 said energy prices are currently the biggest contributor to inflation. So there you go. That's a very distinct data point to me. And then a lot of these companies think that their industry is under more pressure to decarbonize than at any other time. So they're all saddled with this. Got to make money, but they're really pressured to decarbonize. Where's that pressure coming from? Who's pressuring Shell or ExxonMobil or all these people to decarbonize? Who is it? BlackRock is a good answer, and stakeholders is a good answer. I believe this is coming right from the shareholder consumer level. That message is being sent loud and clear. It has nothing to do with politics. The shareholders of these companies and the investors like BlackRock, who's a significant one, are forcing this change now. It won't be consistent, but that's where it's coming from, which is why I don't think the political dimension is going to stop this.
Not that
Yes.
Not that
Sorry?
It's not the people buying the ETF. It's the lobbies and networks.
Yeah.
People who own them.
Yeah. I mean, BlackRock controls $9 trillion of all the money in the world, right? And there's only $84 trillion in the world. So that's, I mean, what they say is going to matter. Larry Fink, I mean, you can read what he's saying about this. He is all about energy transition.
What's the motivation for that? Like, why is BlackRock
So my gut, and this is what I think, and this is what we heard from these people, I don't think the fossil fuel industry is investable anymore. I don't think you can get the returns that you want if you're going to invest in fossil fuels anymore. Build a new coal mine, put the money into it, and see what happens. This is about money. It is money and markets. That's why Larry Fink is taking the pension funds that invest in him and directing them towards renewables because you can make better money. At its heart, that's what it is. I hate to say it that way. It's cold, but that's what it's about. There's nothing wrong with making money and doing well for the world at the same time. I think we can do that. So the CFOs, yeah, their profits are down, et cetera, negative impact on revenue, blah, 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 blah. This is during COVID. So they're all concerned. They all thought they missed the boat. They have lost revenues during COVID. Demand went down. Look what's happening. So now they're all thinking, how are we going to get back into this? So I suspect what will happen is there'll be more of a shift towards renewables because they're more investable. Oh, I'm going to show you carbon capture. Okay, almost done with this stuff. So this shock report has sort of 5 things that we think that need to happen. You can read those, but there's one I really want to talk about, which is number 5. The problem with all this is it's expensive. And the people who are least able to afford the energy transition are the people who are already not privileged. And that's true of the communities that are around us in all the cities that we live. And it's also true of developing countries. And this is the part that's really, really, really of concern. It's not possible, in my opinion, for us to go to the Philippines, where we have offices. We have offices in the Philippines. They're coal-based. 50% of their energy is coal. I don't think we can go to them and say, you're not moving fast enough. You better get off the coal. Because first, they don't have renewables. They don't have renewable energy there. They don't have renewable resources there. And who are we to tell them, hurry up, when we made most of the emissions? We can't do that. So how are we going to help them do something? How are we going to help them go from coal to, for instance, natural gas? And then people will throw up their arms. Some of our people throw up their arms and say, well, but natural gas is a fossil fuel as well. And it is. It's a fossil fuel. You burn natural gas, you make CO2 into the atmosphere. That's a new source of CO2 into the atmosphere. This is about transition. This is about progress, not perfection. It's still better than coal. And then we'll figure out what to do with the natural gas problem. I use natural gas like crazy in my house in Waterloo, Ontario. It's cold in the winter, as it is here. I use natural gas. So what am I going to do about that? Well, I bought a heat pump a little while ago. Does anyone have a heat pump? You know about them? Okay, so we have really good incentive programs in Ontario. So I put a heat pump in. That's basically going to take heat out of the cold air, even at minus 20, and it's going to concentrate it and make heat for my house in the winter. About 85 to 90% of all my heat going forward will come from electricity, which in Ontario is grid clean, rather than natural gas. But I have the means to do that, and not everyone does. So a just transition. How do we ensure a just transition for our own communities and for the rest of the world as well as we build all this infrastructure? Okay, specifics. Talked about hydrogen before. I have notes on this, actually. Better look them up. Hydrogen is a wonderful thing. We do a lot of work in the hydrogen economy. Now, what does hydrogen get used for? So I talk about mobility. I believe transit, buses, are going to go this way. Yes. Sorry? To decarbonize absolutely correct. Yeah, heavy industry, steel and cement. Get hydrogen into steel and cement to decarbonize them, 100%. Mobility, heavy duty vehicles, long distance vehicles, transport trailers on the highways. Take them to hydrogen. Anheuser-Busch has already bought hydrogen vehicles. They run through fuel cells. We all know what a fuel cell is. You can do that all day long. It's still an electric vehicle. It's just without a big battery. It's got a supply of hydrogen on board, compressed. If anyone brings up the Hindenburg, I'm going to scream because everyone always brings up the Hindenburg, that big blimp full of hydrogen that blew up. That was 100 years ago, right? We know how to deal with hydrogen safely. We use millions of tons of hydrogen in North America already. We can make it in a clean manner. Single most important way of doing it in the future is taking renewable electricity, applying that electricity to a water molecule. We already said water is where all this stuff is. And you're going to split up that water molecule in a process called electrolysis into hydrogen and oxygen, both of which you can now use. That can be done. Export market. A rapidly developing market is coming on North American shore for taking renewable electricity, turning it into hydrogen, and then moving that hydrogen to other countries that don't have renewable resources. In the past, we could not take solar energy and wind power and export it to other countries. You're not going to run an electrical line under the Atlantic Ocean. Hydrogen is the disruptor. You can take the renewable electricity, make the hydrogen. You can convert the hydrogen to ammonia, for instance, and you can easily supply ammonia to other countries. And that is the game in North America now. We will be a net exporter of hydrogen from our substantial renewable energy resources. Yeah.
So some company down south that started this experiment of mixing hydrogen with
Yeah.
the natural gas plant. I think they said they got up to 25%.
Yeah.
Efficiency. But still the cost, today the research, what they say, the cost of 1 megawatt is still very high, additional power. Quite may up and keep funding them. That's the biggest hurdle they're going through. Is like the states don't want it to go retail.
Yeah.
The research and all this development costs a lot.
Yeah.
They're all investor-owned companies. They're not going to put billions of dollars. Nobody's paying for it.
That's where the Inflation Reduction Act comes in. So we've got the funding. You can get a $3 a ton production tax credit for hydrogen now. That equalizes it. That's what this project is. By the way, your take is great. For PG&E, we're making hydrogen and we're putting it into the natural gas grid. How are you going to get off natural gas? Hydrogen is one of the answers. You can start blending hydrogen into the natural gas network. You have to do it safely. Hydrogen is a smaller molecule than methane. It can escape. It can get through the wells. What's it going to do when it gets into your gas stove or to your furnace? Is it safe? Yes.
Every time I hear that, how, like, you're gonna solve something,
Yeah.
it has never turned out good for the other party. So what I mean by that is, this Inflation Reduction Act,
Yeah.
anytime you subsidize something, technology cannot stand on its own feet. And when I say technology, means to be able to have a technical solution and an economical solution that's viable. That's by word definition means engineering the product to me. So if it cannot stand, and if you have to help this much, who is ready to pay? Like if we had to ask anybody in here that, hey, to come here, you are using your car,
Yeah.
you are using the road, and everything had an environmental effect. So now, the toll booth, when you pay $100, you start to change opinions about, how this works. So my point is, to summarize, why subsidize? If technology is there, it should work.
So the technology is there, the cost isn't. It's that simple. So it's like the solar thing. The only reason solar really took off is because at the beginning it was subsidized. People improved the technology, made it more efficient, to the point where now it's the cheapest way to make electricity in the world.
Same thing with EVs.
Same thing with EVs.
I don't think moving from free market capitalism to socialism, we have to.
Well,
Reverting back 20 years, in 1990 to 2000, it was a public-private partnership that made United States an energy independent operation. I mean, even though fracking is a bad word, it provided the funding by the private government, spurred the growth, and then private companies took over. It has to be a cooperation and collaboration between the private and public. You see what
I think go ahead, Sridhar.
5 minutes, our timer is not working.
Right, so it'll less than that,
Yeah.
So we probably time to wrap up.
I'll talk to you more about that, because I've got, by the way, I'm from Canada, which is popularly known as a socialist country. I don't have a negative reaction to that word at all. Okay, I showed you the apple, and you saw this maybe in that video that we showed as well at City of Toronto. They take all their organic waste, they shove it into a biological process called anaerobic digestion. It's an old process. It's natural microbes. You can see tanks in the back there. Those are anaerobic digesters. That's where their food waste goes. Converts into something called biogas, which is like a dirty natural gas. It's got a lot of CO2 in it, water, VOCs, all these wonderful things. You scrub that all out, which is the equipment at the front there, and you've got renewable natural gas. Natural gas that is not created from a fossil product. Absolutely doable. App placed everywhere in Europe, incredibly popular over there, and we're not doing enough of it here. We could, and we need to, so there's a substantial lift that needs to happen in this field as well. Now, to your point, renewable natural gas costs 5 to 7 times more than natural gas. If you're going to make this product, it's going to cost 5 to 7 times more. So this is not going to work unless it's initially subsidized until that cost curve comes in. Not today. All right, someone asked about carbon capture, one of my favorite topics. So progress, not perfection, is carbon capture. I don't love carbon capture, but we do it, and we need to do it. You have to. If we're not going to jump off the fossil fuel cliff tomorrow, we can't. So let's capture those emissions. Let's do something with them. I will say to you this, the amount of emissions that you could capture, there's not enough use for that CO2 in any market in which we operate. There's not enough. Not even close. So what you're going to have to do is sequester it underground, which means you have to find the places where you can actually put it. So think about pore space, caverns. Where are they? The interesting thing about the US is all the places where you can put CO2 are not the places where the emissions are coming. So there will be a huge infrastructure lift of carbon dioxide pipeline developing in the US. ExxonMobil just bought a $4.5 billion asset in the Gulf. A company called Denbury that is specialized in CO2 pipeline. We're going to need to build this infrastructure in order to do carbon capture properly. It's a part of the transition.
Yeah, sure.
I haven't talked about the future properly yet.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, 2 things in the future. Just two things that I want everyone to think about for the future. And just remember, this is a plant in Squamish, British Columbia by Carbon Engineering. It's a direct air capture facility. DAC, D-A-C, direct air capture. Pay attention to that one. This is the democratization of decarbonization. This is what I call this approach. Doesn't really exist yet. It's incredibly expensive and very small. This plant does 100 tons of carbon dioxide removal directly from the atmosphere. It takes carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere, not at the top of the stack. Anyone can do this, which is why it's a democratized way to decarbonize. Anyone can build one of these, but they're very expensive just now. But you can also put them over those sequestration sources, and you can grab it. So direct air capture is coming. It's got a long way to go. It is probably the only way we have in the world of actually pulling CO2 back from the atmosphere. Everything else we do reduces emissions. So this is a very important one. That's kind of what it looks like. I mean, it's a chemical process. It's pretty simple. The question is who's going to win this battle and who's going to get this deployed at mass scale, because that's what we need. And lastly, does anyone know what this is? I always forget the actual name of this thing. Oh, I have it here. Anyone know? Take a guess. It's nuclear. Yeah, it's in France. It's European, it's in France. This is the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor in France. It's being constructed. This is fusion. So this is the process that the sun undergoes to create energy. It's the opposite of our conventional nuclear plants, which are all fission. They split an atom. This combines 2 atoms together to make energy. This is going to have to happen. If we're going to electrify the whole world, the amount of electricity we need, we're not going to get it from renewables. It's just not going to be enough, especially with the intermittency. We need this.
All right.
Thank you.
let me use this opportunity to invite one of our national board members and Connexit CEO, G. Satish, to award the plaques, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. But by the way, according to EIA, it's 20% nuclear. So I beg to differ. I'm going to talk about it later today. It's not 12%, it's 20% in the U.S.
In the U.S.,
In the U.S., we have 95 plants running today.
Just 2 minutes.
While you guys are getting together for the picture, I'll hide behind here. But we also have a Corporate Excellence Recognition Program Award for Tej. And since he has to leave early today, we'd like to make sure that we get that to him as well, okay? So this is a special recognition from ASEI to corporate leaders who have done exceptionally well in their fields. And so we want to make sure that before you leave, Tej, we're happy to share that with you.
Well, you should come in. Yeah. Are we ready? Yeah, so the next session is about to be moderated and more of a lightning talk to continue the same conversation. Let me introduce Ram G. Ramanujam. He's a civil engineer, got his bachelor's from NIT Trichy. And when we ask him, hey, what's your resume? He says, I have a one-line resume. I started it in SOMAT in 1989 as an engineer. Now I lead it. That's a very simple resume, but he's a man of simple, few words, but he does a lot that we know. So he has done several infrastructure projects in the Detroit area, like the sports stadiums, both the terminals at the Detroit Metro Airport, few freeways, bridges, waterways facilities, etc. Ram enjoys teaching Bal Vihar. They're dedicated every Sunday. The whole family is to Chinmaya mission, and he believes the spirit is more important than matter. Ram, please take over. Thank you.
Well, namaste and vanakkam once again. Just by a show of hands, do we have any architects in the room? So we don't, thank goodness. You know, this is the American Society of Engineers of Indian origin, and this room, as an engineer, just bothers me a whole lot, because it was definitely not an engineer, and I can see a couple of engineers looking at white, who would have put a column right in the middle so that we can see the screen. So if you cannot see the screen, please move over to a good spot where you can see it and don't have to, crane over and get a neck pain or anything. So, and by the way, thanks for the introduction. The topic we have today is a very powerful topic. We're going to talk about the future. We're going to talk about economy, which is a little different than finance. It is not just about making money, but it is actually about producing jobs, right? So it's about the future economies. It is about building something, which is always a great thing. But the two key words in the presentation are energy and infrastructure. Without these two, nothing can be done. Whether it is putting the Chandrayaan-3 on the south pole of the moon, which so far India has been the only country to do in the world, or drinking, there you go, I love that, yep, something to definitely be proud of, or whether it is drinking a can of Coke. For both of these, we need to have the energy that is going to make these processes work, and we need to have the infrastructure that can build it. You need to have the plant, you need to have the water, you need to have, the energy, you need to have the roads that transport the materials to the plant and to the consumer after that. So, a beautiful topic. We have two people who are going to talk about it. And by the way, today is actually the International Translation Day, or the International Translators Day. I bring that up, September 30th. I bring that up because without translators, basically none of us would have been able to overcome the barrier of language. People do research in different countries in different languages. Mankind would not have been able to enjoy the benefits of science, nor enjoy the beauty of the arts. So we have today two people, I'm not going to just call them speakers or experts, they're actually translators who are going to translate the complex technical knowledge they have in their fields into simple words so that you and I can speak. Our first translator that I'm going to call upon is actually Ron Brenke. Ron is a civil engineer. He is also a licensed professional engineer, with the state of Michigan. He went to school at Michigan State University, and yeah, there you go. Love that. So yeah, good. He's on the advisory board for Michigan State University as well as for Western Michigan University for engineering, and also for serving in one of those universities. He has an interesting background. He spent 6 years with the federal government for FHWA, and then after that he spent several years, I think 6 or 7 years, with the Road Builders, which is a contractors association, and now he is actually with ASEIC. He is executive director of ASEIC, which is the American Council of Engineering Companies. It's a consortium of engineering businesses, consulting businesses. He is also the executive director of ASCE, so he wears dual roles. One fun fact about him, again, which is not on his resume, he said that he actually, at one time, moved 10 times within a period of 5 years and to 9 different states. So Ron, I really salute you for getting a job after that. No, thank you. And the other fun fact he said was that he's a triathlete. So he probably ran, swam, and biked. And that probably really helped him run around all these different states. So with that, Ron, I invite Ron to the podium. And then the second speaker that we have is Vineet. I was going to do it as each of them presents, but I think we'll just have both of them come out at the same time. Vineet also is a translator. And those of us who were in the previous session, we heard him. Some of the questions he brought up, it clearly shows he knows what he's talking about. He is an electrical engineer, comes from one of the best institutes in India, and that is the IIT Roorkee. So that's where he got his bachelor's degree. He has a master's in electrical engineering as well as in computer engineering, and that is from Kansas State University. He has been in the energy field for multiple years, over 20 years. He worked for a company called Entergy, before, and then he's moved to Michigan. He's been now with a company called ITC, and ITC is in the energy, business. He wears a lot of hats, and just looking at the list, I was mind-boggled. But he does everything from running the operations to also making sure that they do the right thing. Because ultimately, everything boils down to doing the right thing. We have a session later on in the convention that says, do good by doing good. A couple of fun facts about him. He said that he runs, he likes to run, and that he also plays golf. And I was wondering, how do these mesh, Running is really fast and energetic, and golf I never associated with much, but they don't even walk much nowadays. It looks like they ride the cart. But anyway, he manages to get a beautiful balance. So with that, I invite both of them. They're going to talk about two different aspects. First, Ron is going to give a presentation about primarily civil infrastructure, and then Vineet is going to talk about the electrical infrastructure. So with that, I invite our translators to come join me at the podium here. Thank you.
Ram, thank you for a very nice welcome. Yeah, so I grew up on a dairy farm. So I had basically never been anywhere. You have to milk cows every day, morning and night, Christmas, it doesn't matter. So when I got an opportunity to work for the federal government and to actually travel, I was very excited about that, and fortunately got to go to a lot of places and see a lot of different things. So I was happy to do that. So as Ram mentioned, and by the way, Ram is a friend and a mentor. Ram is actually our national director for ASEIcon. He goes to Washington and he votes on behalf of Michigan when it comes to issues affecting, ASEIcon. So thank you for your service in doing that. He's a great leader. I'm going to talk first about the infrastructure report card. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but every 5 years, ASCE Michigan puts out an infrastructure report card. It's a simple way to really start the conversation about Michigan's infrastructure, whether it be with elected officials, the public, businesses, anybody that everybody's affected by infrastructure, right? But what it really does is we try to keep it in an A to F format, and it's something that everybody can understand and decipher. 2023 report card gave Michigan an overall C- for a GPA, which, as you know, is not the best grade, right? It's better from the 2018 grade of a D+. So we have made some incremental progress. But as you'll see, we've only made incremental progress in certain areas of our infrastructure. So as I mentioned, these are the grades that are given, and this is basically what the grades mean. As I said earlier, this report card is referenced by a lot of different news media. We get calls all the time about, why did this get an F or why did this get an A? And that's really what we want. We want that to be out there so people can start talking about it. The grades are very simply laid out. The grades are determined by actually 8 different categories. So we put together teams of engineers in Michigan, whether it be, water infrastructure. We've got, water professionals. If it's energy or bridges or transportation, we gather a group of those. They come from academia, they come from government, they come from the private sector. This last report card, I think we spent almost 2 years putting it together and coming up with a grade. And it's very difficult because things are changing, right? I mean, 6 months, you could have more funding from somewhere or less funding, and conditions change. So it's really a shot in time of what our infrastructure looks like.
How old is it? How old are these grades?
So those were released in May of this year. Yep, of this year.
But they look at 2 years before from May of this year?
I mean, it's as of May of this year, this is what the grades look like.
Okay.
So
it's 6 months old. I mean,
that's right.
Like 3, 4, 5 months.
It is, yep. And what you see here is a difference between our 2018 grades and our 2023 grades. So you can see which categories either didn't change or the condition went up or got worse. Bridges and energy both went down in grades. Our bridges, 12% of our bridges are in severe or poor condition. So that one went down. Energy, as you know, how many people lost power this year? And lost power for longer than we probably should have. Michigan does not fare well in restoring power very quickly. We also pay a little more for energy than a lot of other sectors, and I'm sure You go. There you are. I'm sure he will talk more about that when we get to that. We did see some increase in grades, primarily in roads went up just a little bit. I think you're probably aware of the governor's Rebuild Michigan program that infused $3.5 billion worth of funding for roads. If you don't feel it right now, you're not driving anywhere, because I know it took me a little longer to get here than expected. But we also have some real challenges, in some other areas, mainly stormwater and wastewater. As I mentioned, energy got a D, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because there's a lot of people a lot more smarter when it comes to energy than I am. But this is just a page out of the report that we published. If you want the full report, you can go to reportcard.com. infrastructurereportcard.com, search for Michigan, and you can there's a 150-page report that delves into each one of these categories. So I encourage you to do that. In every state, almost every state, puts out a report card now. And ASCE, the national office, is really good in making sure that we all use the same standards. They review the report cards to make sure that there's concise information from state to state, and that they all correlate with each other so they can compare. So that's been really good. So I'm going to shift a little bit now to transportation, all right, and where we are and where we're headed with transportation. So this is a little bit dated. This is up through November 2022, but Michigan stands about 16th in electrical vehicle sales. Okay, so you can see there's other states that actually sold a lot more. California's off the charts, so they aren't even on here. But I also have been told that they have restrictions on when you can charge your car already because of the lack of power. Also, Michigan is receiving $110 million from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to build out our EV charging infrastructure. Michigan submitted a plan to Washington. It's been approved, and now there's RFPs out to start finding vendors to build out this grid. So the goal is to have a charging station on these major routes every 50 miles. The charging station, there'll be 4 charging stations at each one, and they will be within a mile of an interchange or where you get off. So obviously, kind of feels like this should have been done first, but before we delved into the EVs. But it's nice to see that there's a huge investment coming forward. And Michigan, on its own, has been also investing in these charging stations themselves. So we're gonna make some progress there. Switching over to our roads. So as I mentioned, you saw the grades they got. Every year, we have a extremely well thought out asset management program in Michigan for roads. We've been doing it for 10 plus years. We're a leader, quite frankly, across the U.S. So we know what condition our roads are in because they get surveyed every year, and we're expanding that down into the local level now as well. But what you see here is just the most recent information on roads. Only 25% of our trunk lines on the federal aid system are in good condition. And that number is going to go down, I'll guarantee it, if we don't increase our funding. Bridges, same thing. I had mentioned earlier, 12% are in that severe category. That's higher than any other Great Lakes state. Every other Great Lakes state has better bridge conditions than we do. So we've got some work to do there. Whoop, wrong way here. If you haven't seen this chart, I want you to call your attention to it. So that blue line that you see, the blue dotted line, that's the condition, overall percentage of roads in good condition. That's where we're headed if we don't increase funding for roads. Like I said, we've been doing asset management for a long time, so these models are the predictive models are very good. They've played out very well over time.
What time does it become safety concern?
Well,
that's why I think it's like, we keep on giving this report card, but if there has to be some point where you can create some issues.
I agree. I 100% agree. And there are safety concerns. I mean, You see I-beams under bridges now, right? As just
single lanes close to 8 mile of the bridge.
Yes.
Can't take it.
Just yes.
Into 1 lane.
Correct.
Just to keep them open.
Because it's risky to drive.
So the other lines that you see are greater investments in infrastructure, and these are big numbers. You know, $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion more. That's what we have to do to turn this curve around. I mean, we've been disinvesting in our roads for 30 years. Other states have prioritized it a lot more. They've invested more per capita. It's undeniable. It's a fact. So I'm going to talk about a little bit further some solutions to this, but I just want everybody to understand this is where we're headed if we don't do something. This is the 5-year MDOT DOT program that they put out every year. This is the projected. I just want to highlight, you can see down there with the orange chevron signs there, that's the Rebuilding Michigan program. I can tell you it's almost done. I mean, the money's gone. And we've got 45 new projects built. They're major freeway projects that are going to last 30, 40 years, which is great. But that's the amount that needs to be invested every year, not just one time. The other problem with this is we sold bonds to do this work. So guess what? We're starting to pay those bonds back now. $200 to $250 million of the year, every year, comes off the top of the program to pay interest and to pay these bonds back as we go forward. So you can see our programs going from 2.9 down to 1.9 just in the next 5 years. So we need some relief going forward. Water infrastructure. What's underground, you don't see it, people don't think about it, they don't care about it, right? Until something doesn't work, you don't have water, you can't get rid of your wastewater. 75% of Michigan's water and wastewater systems are public. The rest are on private wells and private septic tanks, which also have their own problems, right? The biggest problem is...
2 minutes, John.
Okay. The biggest problem is our system is 60 to 100 years old. I think I just saw a slide from the Great Lakes Water Authority. They said more than 30% of the Detroit's infrastructure, underground water infrastructure, was built in 1920. So that's why we're seeing problems. So there's a big gap in funding. The numbers on the 6 to 10% is something we have to be careful of, though, and that's how much people are paying for their water, paying for wastewater to get rid of their wastewater. We can't make that too much. Just like you don't buy a car you can't afford or a house you can't afford, we can't overcharge our residents to pay for this. The final thing I want to just mention is how much in population do you think Michigan grew from 2010 to 2020, a 10-year period?
It went down that far.
It went up 2% in 10 years. The last 2 years, from 2021 to 22, we've lost population, and that's what this shows. So think about that. You know, other states are growing, and that's your tax base, right? That's how you pay for a lot of this stuff. We've got a problem. Michigan has a problem. So the governor has put together a new Growing Michigan Together Council. Hopefully you've seen that announced in the news to help counteract this problem. There's 4 work groups. One is on infrastructure in place, and I'm fortunate to be appointed to that work group. And we're working on proposing recommendations, long-term solutions to water and transportation infrastructure. The other thing that we're charged with is housing, affordable housing. We're losing young people. The college graduates are leaving the state. That's the highest number of people leaving the state. And they're leaving because we don't have cities like Austin, Texas, or parts of North Carolina where kids don't even want to have cars. You know, they want to go have a walkable city. They want to live close to work where they can walk to work or take public transportation, which we also don't do a good job with in Michigan. And they're leaving to experience that. So we've got to come up with ways to keep our young people here, but also not lose, or try to attract more people so we can increase our population. The other problem is we're growing, our population in Michigan is growing older. We're now the 14th oldest state in the country because the older people are staying, the younger people are leaving. So, yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to just share this information with you. I look forward to some Q&A after we get done. So.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Ron, for that. Vineet invited you to come here. You heard one very important point here, that which is to go to the root cause of any problem, basically. We have to go to the root cause. And the root cause in Michigan, at least, is we need a bigger tax base. We need to get more people here so that we can pay for all of this. Vineet, it's all yours now.
Sure.
Oh, downward? Downward. Okay. So, I think I should have, if I was before Tej, a lot of his questions, answers you're going to see in my slides. You could have scored better. But one thing, I mean, I'm going to relate to is that before I get into some details of it is you know, it's a really good segue. Tej talked about.
Can you walk a little bit on your right?
Sure. Sure. So Tej talked about offshore wind, more renewable, more solar, more wind. Let me put a simple question to all of you. Let's say everybody gets a Tesla, maybe 2 of them, but there are no roads that you can get out.
So we need flying cars.
So it's as simple. That's the analogy I can give it to you. You can have all the renewables, you can have all the wind, you can have all the solar, but if there is no infrastructure to bring it to where it's needed, it's no good. So if you look at, and some of my slides will show, is like where you can put wind turbines. You're not going to put them in a downtown, right? You're going to put them in remote areas where the wind blows and where people, you know, can ignore them because they don't look that good. You need infrastructure to bring that power where the load is. So before I go into the detail, I just put a slide just for basics for people who are not from the industry. It's a 3-part system, what we use for infrastructure worldwide: generation, transmission, and distribution. And I'm going to more focus on transmission infrastructure. Transmission you can kind of think of as like highways. When you go from state to state, you got bigger highways. Distribution's more like roads. When you take exit, the power comes to your house. So some general stats on U.S. electric grid. It's a really old infrastructure, 150 years old. Largest interconnected infrastructure on Earth. We have 3 interconnects in this country that tie together. They're separate interconnect. They don't tie together actually, and 240,000 miles of lines. So where I'm headed with this is, I'm going to skip that what we do in the interest of time. So what we have as an electric grid today, the problem in infrastructure is you saw 150-year-old grid, aging infrastructure. What's happening to demand? It's growing every day. You got EV, you want heat pumps, you want to decarbonize. All of that needs infrastructure. So what we see is there is, even by 2030, projected to be 25% increase in electric demand nationwide, and that's a lot. So, and this chart kind of shows that. So if you look at, it's in terawatt hours, current electricity consumption, and if we do electrify, and this is not just EV, you can see the portion of EV. You add 100% of light duty vehicle, you can see the growth. You add 100% of heavy duty vehicles, you can see the growth in demand. You add building space heating, and then industrial processes are the biggest one, that a lot of them use fossil fuel today. You add all that, you're talking 2.5 times increase. That's a pretty significant increase, which the infrastructure today can't handle. So now this is to what some of that Tej talked about, where we are in generation mix, how we produce our energy today and the projections. So like who was saying, yes, 19 or 20% nuclear is correct, according to EIA. So this is where we are. You can see where we're going. In 2050, it's expected to be 44% renewable. Still natural gas, about 34%. These are projections, they can change, EIAs, and then still about 10% of coal. Now, among renewable, further break it down, you see majority is solar and wind, about 82%, and then you got the rest. So this is a pretty big shift. I would tell you, for those who are not from the industry, if you ever notice a rotating machine, like the traditional generators that we have today, when something bad happens, there's something called inertia they have. So it's a machine with a lot of mass that's rotating. Something bad happens, it has some inertia to capture that problem for a few seconds before people can take action and avoid an issue.
You move to wind turbines and solar, a lot of that goes away. So there is technology development research that's being done to avoid those kind of problems. And this is pretty much similar to that last slide, that how our generation mix is changing. Now, where I want to get to is that if you look at the map, this is kind of an eye chart, but just pay attention to the colors, where most of the wind is in the US, where the wind blows, kind of like the more purplish and red are where you have more and more wind. Then you go next, and you notice where the solar is, kind of more to the left, to the west, down south, and all that, right? That's where you can produce those electricity. You got about 100 million people right here in this area towards the east. How are they going to get their renewable? They still need power. They're not going to live with candles lit in their house, right? If you make it all renewable and throw away all the coal and natural gas, they still need power. Where would power come from them? And that's where you need infrastructure. So this is more of a projection, and I wouldn't worry about the picture in the chart. What it is showing is that the total transmission capacity, the wires that transfer power, need to triple by 2050 to make the clean energy transition happen. Otherwise, it's going to be my same analogy. You can have all the Teslas in your house, but if you don't have the roads, they're just going to sit there and do nothing. So, there were some research, but there's nothing significant that's been done research-wise or is possible because it's always a long distance. The problem with power transmission is nobody wants to see the generators in their backyard or around it, but everybody needs power. So that technology, I think they've done some research, but it's still, I don't think anybody, at least to my knowledge, is investing in that from a larger scale. So some of the changes and challenges we focus is, as I mentioned, transmission infrastructure, reliability, resiliency, regional connectivity, and evolving sources. And I'll touch on some of those more. And this is, maybe for Ron, maybe you wrote that before, but this was a comment from ASEI, is that among all infrastructure, electricity has the second largest total funding need and the largest funding shortfall, just as a code I wanted to put there. Now, I want to give a couple examples so you can relate to it, that where we were hundreds of years ago, these two infrastructure development, the interstate highways and telecom infrastructure. Think about that. If we didn't build the interstate highway system, if we were in the battle that we are today with the transmission infrastructure, where Michigan says, well, you know what? I'm not going to pay for I-75 because it doesn't benefit my residents, right? Or we would not have an infrastructure of interstate highways if it was not federalized and more mandated in the country that we're building it. And same thing with telecom infrastructure, right? Everybody's got cell phone and you got 5G and fiber optic network. It's a nationwide infrastructure that was built and we're reaping the benefits today, and it's reducing the cost today. Similarly, in transmission, the problems what we have is a lot of political state versus federal, where when you build a line between two states, it's always a fight between the two states that my ratepayer shouldn't pay for it. Why should I pay for generators, the power that generates in Kansas or Oklahoma, and if it goes to California because it benefits California? California should pay for it. So, and where we are today is, just to give you an idea, typical power plant, 30 plus years old. Transformers that we use in the grid, 40 plus years. Lines, 70% of lines are almost 25 plus year old. It's that aging infrastructure that we have. So I would give you, resiliency is another factor that we need, and something we talked about a little bit is what we call resiliency is how fast you can bounce back when something bad happens. And that costs money. When you design infrastructure in a way that when a storm hit, somebody said how many people lost power, right? So the way we design infrastructure is to make sure that when one line goes out, you don't lose power. You have redundancy, you have resiliency, you have processes in place that you can restore your system. So, and that basically, and just give you an example, what we do and some utilities do and we fight with the regulators is we have to keep adequate inventory. We have to make sure that if things fall apart, we can build it quickly with the supply chain constraints you have. A typical lead time when you have a transformer that supplies a large city fails is about 5 years to get that. So you don't want people out for 5 years without power. So it's that simple. Now, some of the challenges I'm going to talk about, and I'll give you an example of a project that we recently ran. It's long lead development time for transmission. So we talked about offshore wind. I'll give you an example. There's a line we are building in Iowa that goes all the way to Wisconsin, crosses a small U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge, 1.5 mile over Mississippi River. We started that project in 2012. It's been 10, 11 years. We haven't been able to get permits and get over the lawsuits to cross 1.5 mile of wildlife refuge. And to give you a backdrop of that, there's already a coal plant that's dysfunctional and a line that runs over that refuge using bigger area of that refuge, which we own, which we're planning to retire and restore that refuge and use less acreage of that refuge. There are environmental groups and people that sued and kept the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Commission kept putting barriers, even though we put everything saying, look, we're going to restore, we're going to use less land, we're going to have everything in place. In fact, it got to a point where there is a protected species of frogs in that area where we were building. So we had to hire an environmental consultant who would send a crew out every day to look if there are frogs in the area where we're going to be driving. If there are, they'll pick them up and relocate them, and then we drive. Wow. So who's paying for all that? Ratepayers. 10 years, 11 years to build one single line. So we just got last year, we got ruling from Supreme Court allowing us to get the permit to do this. So the actual construction time is 2 years, roughly. Litigation time, permit time, is 10 years. So if you notice, Senator Manchin was trying to get the permitting reform passed, and it's going nowhere because of the political differences in this country. So where I'm going with that is, you can have all the renewables. Am I out of time?
3 more minutes.
All right, sounds good. So you can have all the renewables, but if we don't start to think building infrastructure, say if we think about it 2035 or 40, you're going to take another 30 years to build that. So this is more of a forward thinking. We got to build it first before we start to bring these generators and solar and wind. So as I mentioned, is a lack of investment and long-term vision, federal and state policy. So there is the Infrastructure Act that we talked about that put about, for transmission, about $2.3 billion of funding for projects. But again, doesn't do anything with permitting, doesn't do anything with the state and federal policies. It doesn't resolve the issues where it takes years and years for a project to get materialized. So some of those things is really work pushing for. We're ruled by some entity called Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to give them more authority and work with the states to resolve some of those issues. Otherwise, we're going to be talking about it 10 years from now, that why are we not using renewables? So the last thing I would end with is that it's transmission infrastructure is key to unlocking the energy future. Yes, it is a cost, but if you look at it, it's like it's a long-term benefit. A typical bill which customer gets is about 12-13% of it is a transmission infrastructure. Rest 87% is generation and distribution. So by building that larger network and infrastructure, it's enabling the whole nation economy, but hopefully we get over the barriers of localized issues, state versus state, and see it as like a highway infrastructure or a telecom infrastructure. So I'll end with that.
Thank you, Ron. Why don't you come over? So thank you very much, Vineet. Appreciate that, and especially managing the time as well. So, and Vineet, by the way, was one of the latest recipients of his school's Professional Progress Award that was actually given to alumni. They only give 1 or 2 per year, and his engineering school actually awarded him that 2022. So congratulations. So I have a couple of questions. We do have about 10 minutes or so for questions. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions. So guys, we heard a lot about the infrastructure is in bad shape. It was built in, thousands of years ago, and we need a lot of money. And I saw one slide that boggled my mind from you, Vineet. It said $230 to $690 billion of investment is required.
That is correct. That's the Brattle Group and report that says close to that by 2050.
Okay, and Ron also came up and said, just for Michigan, we need $1 billion or so per year for the roads. So just so that we can understand, give us an idea just know how much does it take to lay a mile of road, for instance, or how much does it take to construct a tower or a mile of line? I mean, do you guys have an idea for that?
Yeah, for a line, I think I can give you rough ideas. It differs a lot by terrain. Generally, it's a mile of line is about 1.5 million, but it can change a lot. Like the line we're building in Iowa to Wisconsin, it's a lot of hilly terrain. You have to, if you go over the hills and mountains and all that, the cost goes high pretty significantly. Versus if it's a flat land like Michigan, so it's very variable.
On an average, what does it be?
Be about, like I said, about $1.5 million a mile.
$1.5 million a mile.
For a mile of transmission line.
And we actually have 240,000 miles of transmission
today in the system.
Thank you.
Well, obviously, there's a difference between an interstate road and a county road, right? So the costs are significantly different, but the costs have gone up 30–40%. One of the problems our DOT is dealing with right now is the bids are coming in 30% above the engineer's estimate. So the program that was meant to be built is going to have to be cut back 30% just to pay for the higher costs to build the road. So it's really hard. It depends on, you know, if your interstate's obviously thicker and has bigger base and has drainage, you know, underneath it as well. So that costs a lot more than, you know, a mile of county road that may not have that, but the costs are significant. They really are. And actually, it's $3.9 billion per year is what's recommended for roads to get onto good condition.
And I would add that just one point to the cost, which I forgot to mention. So the benefit that provides, like the line I was mentioning you, the 102 miles long line that we've been working on for 10 years, almost 17 gigawatt of renewable power is waiting on that line to get to the grid. So it is that much of a benefit. So we basically talk about the clean energy transition, but we're stopping for 10 years, 17 gigawatt of energy that could have been clean energy connected to the system.
So there's not only the cost, but there's also the lost opportunity
Lost
cost.
opportunity.
Okay, so thank you. So I'm going to pivot a little bit, and then I'm going to open it up to others if they have questions. You know, right now the big thing that is happening, especially in Michigan and Detroit, we all know is the UAW strike that is going on. So, you know, why I bring that up is that strike is not just about wages necessarily or benefits, but it's an existential issue that they're fighting, and they're worried about what EVs are going to do to them. So as we talk about building economies of the future, right, on energy and infrastructure and all of that, what do we see happening to the workforce, the current workforce, and what does all of your building for the future do to the current workforce?
Well, I'll start with, at our national conference this year, we had an economist speak, and she said, you know, I'm so tired of hearing it at holidays that nobody wants to work anymore. These young people don't want to work. She said that every year, 300,000 fewer people are born in the United States than they were last year. So the people are not there. She said it's not that they don't want to work, they don't exist. She said there's 10 million open jobs in the United States, and there's 6 million people to fill those jobs. So I don't care if it's the construction industry or healthcare, everybody is dealing with shortages of workers. So that's going to be a problem going forward. You know, the population is not, you know, we're not having children like we used to, and our population is extremely old and going into retirement. So we've got a real economic problem there.
Well, I would say, I think you have those sessions here, and just as a joke, I throw it out, AI will fix that, because not the children, the workforce issues, some of that. Well, and to reality, I mean, I challenge that to workforce. There is a lot of new development that are happening and threatening the workforce in terms of AI from a lot of structured jobs that are happening. So for sure, we gotta reskill, and we gotta make sure and that people are available and willing to work, because personally, I believe, yes, AI would do a lot for us, but I don't think it should or could replace the humans as the creators. So hopefully, we see that, and the people, like you mentioned, the UW strikes and all, people realize that there are alternates. So there is a middle ground that the workers and the companies need to find to keep the economy going.
Well, thank you. We are a whole bunch of engineers here, primarily probably from the private sector. We think, we dream, we innovate, we have ideas, we say what should be done or what could be done. But ultimately, for anything to really happen in infrastructure, we need someone who can make it happen, and that is the public sector. And so we'd actually like to, we have a few people from the Michigan Department of Transportation here. Divya Iyer is here, Mohammed Azam is here. We have people who actually used to work in the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department that served 40% of Michigan's population. Mr. Shukla is here, Mr. Tiwari, Anjali Tiwari, they're all here. So, how do we, how do your members and your industry, Vineet, how do you figure out we can get the best by working out of these agencies that actually have to make these things happen? We can talk about what we want to do and what should be done. Just like you said, 11 years to get a permit, difficult. Any ideas or thoughts on that?
Well, it's a real balance, and I think, as you mentioned, you want to protect the environment, right? Obviously, we all do, but there's got to be some common sense in some of these things. It's no different with roads. There's a lot of, it's red tape that you have to get through, whether it's the state historic preservation or it's the snails in the rivers, or, we all have to deal with it. I worked on a project up in the Upper Peninsula during the winter. We were extending culverts and stuff in the winter because there was an osprey nest that was right on our project, and you could not disturb that osprey nest during the summer at all. So we built all of these things in the winter, which was more expensive and more difficult to do. So there's got to be a balance there, I think, when it comes to regulation and permitting. Permitting is a problem, everywhere. I think the other difficult part for state agencies is attracting talent and attracting people. We need, as a private sector, we need to work with the public sector to get these things built. And when Eagle doesn't have people that they can hire to process these permits and to review these permits, that's a problem too. So we've got to work together, the private and public sector, to get this infrastructure fixed.
Yeah, so I would say, I think what we try to do is to get more collaboration between federal and state agencies. So there's some power given to Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as far as permitting, where if they see a national need, they can do that, but that has been a contentious issue with this state. So what we urge the regulators is that you can find a way if you work together between the states and federal rather than being polarized or divided. Agreed, we need to protect the environment, but what we're seeing in the last few years or 10 years is a lot of opposition, like on our projects, what we see is not truly an environmental issue. It's more of a political issue raised by certain people, political groups, for individual interest. So it would help if the state and the federal agencies are working together and kind of seeing the need and making it happen rather than, swinging away with the political viewpoints.
Well, thank you all. I did not realize, but we're out of time. I do want to especially appreciate and thank both our translators slash speakers today, because they did not know the questions I was going to ask. I did not know the questions either. I just, as I saw the presentations, it came up to me. So thank you very much, Vineet, and thank you, Ron. I do want to say one quick thing. I see my wife is in the audience here, and she actually was really happy and surprised. She says, why did ASEI ask you to be a moderator? And, I didn't know. She was really surprised, but, spouses know us better than we do ourselves. So just this morning after I registered, I asked our organizers, I said, why did you make me a moderator? They said, oh, it's pretty simple. Those who were experts in their field, we made them the speaker. Those who didn't know anything, we made them the moderator. But I do appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much. And thank you for bringing a very great audience. I apologize. I do want to mention and also recognize Dan Schechter, who used to also work, and he was in the wastewater sector, so he's now working for GHD. But a lot of public officials are making it happen. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Can we invite our wonderful Tiwaris who have been our long-time supporters to come and give the plaques to the speakers, please? Santosh, you come too. Yeah, come. Thank you. Thank you. It was a great panel.
That's what I'm thinking.
And to none other than Ram himself.
I didn't know I was getting a plaque, but thank you guys.
Just to let everybody know, Ram and Ram, there's a team, two brothers are here. So, other Ram is behind and this Ram is here.
Thank you. Lunch? Yes. So right after here, we have lunch is being served right here next to the bar area. Please take your lunch, grab your lunch and go to the main atrium. There'll be award ceremonies while you're eating. Thank you.